Hello everyone, my name is and welcome to Tournament Tactician Week 11, where I try to help you jam last-minute important tournament information into your skull in case you haven't been keeping up and still want to compete. Now this week, Duels of Runeterra is returning to a more centralized and familiar format. They're making a return to region-locked 1-ban best of 3, but moving to no-ban best of 5 for top cut. I like this middle ground a lot, and their reasoning for maintaining the 1-ban format is that the tournament meta is overwhelmingly dominated by Ionia and Piltover Zaun, and if you do just 2 decks like Jamfest did last week, then the match usually gets decided in a best of 1 between the 2 other non-Ionia Piltover Zaun decks, and we all have to sit there and watch another 30 minutes of gameplay anyway. That said, I did want to note that last week across the 24 decks that I got information from, that was the Jamfest top 16 as well as the top 8 of the Good Day Maverick tournament, 5 of the players were not running Piltover Zaun Ionia in their entire lineup, which I think is a higher percentage than we've previously seen, so that's something. And this is nothing. The patch 1.5 nerfs primarily hit Twisted Fate decks, which have sort of become the new NAB standard, and Crimson Elusives. Obviously, this is a small quality of life change for the Heimerdinger decks as well, but I really don't think that matters too much. It's been a while since we actually saw someone win the game by playing Protect the Solitary Monk, and overall the problems of the tournament meta remain unaddressed. Worth noting, we saw 0 Crimson Elusives last week, and while we do see Solitary Monk in Kinku Elusives, we're mostly seeing it as a 1, sometimes 2 of, more for combo plays than aggressive ones, so the change on the power really doesn't affect a whole lot in the grand scheme of the format. Now we're going to take a quick look at the meta, but first, a word from our sponsor. It was me, I'm the sponsor. Now I want to start switching up the format a little bit for these videos. Typically this is the part where I would show you some deck lists of the popular decks in the meta and give you a heads up on the ones you may not have seen yet, but I feel like before I do that, now's a good time to take a look back at my standard lineup predictions from last week and let you know whether I was right or wrong, as it provides a bit more context for the lists I'm going to be showing you, as well as lets you know whether or not listening to me in this meta is worth it or not, because at the end of the day, this is supposed to be a helpful and insightful video, and if I'm throwing out incorrect predictions, you need to know that so that you can adjust accordingly. This hasn't been super relevant lately because the standard lineup during patch 1.2 remained the same the entire time. So first of all, I said last week would be the first time we saw Karma Ezreal take over Vi Heimerdinger in play rate, and on that front I was wrong, though not by much. We saw 10 Heimerdinger Vi and 7 Karma Ezreal, but we also saw 2 Twisted Fate Ezreal, and with the patch 1.5 nerfs to Pilfered Goods and Solitary Monk, I'm gonna double or nothing and say this week we should definitely see Karma Ezreal overtake the top spot, as it doesn't play Solitary Monk while Heimer does, and Pilfered Goods got nerfed, which was a core card in the other Ezreal deck that was dividing the card's regional composition. I had predicted that the standard lineup for the 3-deck format was going to be Ionia, Piltover Zaun, Bald Eagle, and Scouts, and that one was correct. It wasn't more than half of the top cut, but it was the lineup we saw the most with either 2 or 3 players bringing it, I don't exactly remember, but as I had mentioned earlier, we only had 8 deck lists to look at, so hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit more information on that this week, as it is a little bit subject to change. For the most popular aggro lineup, I said we would be looking at Harrowing Darius, Scouts, and Kinku Elusives, which was also correct, and Ghoster Driver actually picked up the win in the Maverick tournament with this lineup. And for the Jamfest 2-deck format, I had predicted that Bald Eagle and Ionia Piltover Zaun would be the most standard lineup, and on that one I was wrong. It was actually Ionia Piltover Zaun and then Braum Swain, which I'll get into once we get into the deck list in a little bit. I lied, we're looking at them right now. So Braum Swain is an interesting deck that I overlooked because it's much better in a 2-deck format than a 3-deck one. Watching the deck over the course of the weekend, it was favored versus Karma Ezreal, which explains the deck's appeal. Mystic Shot and Static Shock don't line up well onto your early units, Braum, Swain, and Leviathan all demand Thermogenic Beam or Will of Ionia, and you have Noxian Fervor for dodging removal as well as Fury of the North for surviving it. And this deck in this meta is actually a great way to highlight how tournament metas have been shaped. Building a tournament lineup in Runeterra for the last couple of metas has been easy. Step 1, you grab your Piltover Zaun Ionia deck. Step 2, you pair your Shadow Isles with X. And Step 3, you build your 3rd deck out of your leftover regions. In patch 1.0, the X had some options: Freljord, Bilgewater, and Piltover Zaun, which then switches up Step 1, but you get the gist. When Brood Awakening got nerfed in patch 1.2, Shadow Isle overwhelmingly paired with Bilgewater, as it was the one Shadow Isle deck that didn't play the card, and later on in the meta we saw Endure Spider start to rise up again, but never overtake Sea Monsters because Frostbite Control was just the best third deck. Now the best Shadow Isle decks are Harrowing Darius, which is Noxus, and Brahmanivia, which is Freljord, and with the buffs to Genevieve Elmhart, Scouts has a reputation as the best third deck. As I mentioned earlier, the standard lineup contains Bald Eagle and Scouts, and the second most popular lineup just swaps out Bald Eagle for Harrowing Darius. This means your strongest Shadow Isle decks are not only fighting for the two regions in this deck, but the best third deck in the format uses the region that you would pair with Shadow Isle anyway, and Shadow Isle is widely regarded as the best playable region in the format because you assume PZ Ionia is going to get banned. If you want to play this deck, you can of course run it alongside Scouts or Sea Monsters and have yourself a functioning lineup, but I think that would be forgetting why this deck did so well in the two deck format, because it has a good Karma Ezreal matchup. Because the Piltover Zon Ionia deck was guaranteed to be exposed, more players brought a second deck that they thought could pick up a win off of it in order to sort of take that free win off the table for their opponent. In a 3-deck lineup, you'd have to have some balls to run this with Scouts and try to pick on the Karma Ezreal, though it's not impossible. It's not like this deck can only beat Karma Ezreal, but I don't think we're going to see this in a lineup that isn't playing to that strategy. So for now, to summarize, I think Swain is resigned to a lineup with Scouts and Piltover Zon Ionia trying to pick on the Piltover Zon Ionia deck of your opponent, which is probably not the most effective use of Noxus in a lineup like that, and I think Harrowing Darius probably gives you a better shot at doing so, and then oh look, you're just back to a slight variation on the standard lineup, which is of course the second most standard lineup. Now, it would be wild not to touch on Topher's winning War Mother's Call deck from Jamfest. It obviously uses the same regional composition as an already popular deck, so it's pretty easy to just make a swap and slot this into your standard 3-deck lineup, though I'm not sure how well this deck is going to be able to consistently perform week in and week out in a 3-deck format. I'm getting similar vibes to Maverick's Freljord Fiora deck, where this player might continue to have some success with it and a couple of people will pick up on it, but I don't think it's going to overtake Bald Eagle in popularity. There weren't a lot of new decks over the past week, and the nerfs didn't affect too much of the tournament meta, but I did want to talk about the two NAB decks and the implications the nerf has on them. So first off, we have Twisted Fate Swain, a deck that I have loved for a long time but has faltered in recent memory. Most of the builds we've seen during patch 1.4 looked more like NAB decks with Swain in them, which was identifiable by the triple Riptide Rex and one Leviathan. I think these just turned back into the older non-NAB version, which actually also topped the Maverick tournament last weekend and looks like this. You can pause the video to take in the glory, but understand that this is probably a tier 3 deck. And as for the Twisted Fate Ezreal deck, I wasn't super duper sold on this deck to begin with, but I think that with Pilfered Goods going to 3 mana, you're not going to be able to keep up with the other decks in the format and do what you want to do. As I've mentioned a lot in the past, NAB decks played a lot like Bannerman and were very tempo focused, and that extra mana makes it very hard to maintain tempo as they weren't saving spell mana that often since they were curving out. Overall, the NAB decks as we know them are probably dead, but that's not the same thing as NAB being dead. But since NAB decks were barely holding their own against the tournament meta, and they took the biggest hit from patch 1.5, I think we're not going to see them again until patch 1.6 when other things get nerfed. There weren't a lot of new decks to show off this week, and I'm probably going to skip the lineup stuff since I was right about the 3-deck lineups last week, and I don't see a reason for anything to really change, which for those of you that somehow missed it, we're looking at Piltover Zon Ionia, Bald Eagle, and Demacia Bilgewater. Piltover Zon Ionia could be Karma Ezreal or Heimerdinger Vi. I'm thinking Karma Ezreal personally. Bald Eagle is of course the Shadow Isle Anivia deck, and Demacia Bilgewater can either be Misfortune Quinn with a lot of Bilgewater Scouts, or it can be Lucian Bannerman with Misfortune. And if you replace Bald Eagle with Harrowing Darius, that's likely what you're looking at for the number 2 lineup. And if you replace the Piltover Zon Ionia out of that with Kinko Elusives, well then you've got the most popular aggro lineup. What's this mean for you? It means that when you pick a lineup that, say, I don't know, picks on the Scout deck that we see prevalent in all 3 of these lineups, then maybe you're well poised going into the meta. I don't know. It's a reasonable assumption. Don't you think? Huh? Anyway, guys, that is going to do it for me. So if you are, this is sort of the wrap up the anecdotes. My name is Boulevard. I'm a caster. If you're looking for where I'm going to be casting this weekend, go ahead and give me a follow up on Twitter. That's from the BLVD. I'll be tweeting out my casting schedule every weekend because I am kind of all over the place this weekend and I'm all over the time zones as well. I'm going to be helping out with the top cut of the Southeast Asia Duels of Runeterra, which is going to be at like 2 in the morning my time. Because I think I'm hopping in a couple rounds late or something along those lines. I'm going to be doing the PCS tournament on Saturday with Shit Just Works, and that's going to be a consistent thing for the next 8 or so weeks until about mid-August, which does mean that I'm not going to be doing Swiss for Duels of Runeterra or Jamfest or anything like that for the foreseeable future, but I will still be around on Sundays for top cuts, and I am doing Saturday top cuts for that tournament, so I'm a top cut man now. I'm moving up in the world, so if you want to watch me cast top 8 action, follow me on Twitter to figure out where it's happening. I believe I'm also doing the top cut of Duels of Runeterra 12 for North America on Sunday, so yeah, just go ahead and follow me on Twitter, and you'll get the notifications on when and where those are happening, as the channels and times tend to swap from week to week. But anyway, thank you so much for coming in, checking out my tournament prep video for you, and good luck in your tournaments this weekend, everybody.